The mistake I made for years was thinking more detail automatically made my artwork better. More texture, more effects, more background, more little things for people to notice. But detail does not save a weak idea, it just hides it for a few seconds. With this piece, the goal was not to make the most complicated artwork possible, the goal was to make one visual idea hit as hard as possible. A wounded hand wrapped in snakes, still reaching upward. That is the image, and that is the point. Everything else in the artwork has to support that, or it doesn't belong there. This piece was created for Free Warren's single Hard to Kill, and the brief needed something dark, aggressive, graphic, and strong enough to work both as a release and as a merch piece. So from the beginning, I wasn't thinking, how do I show off everything that I can draw? I was thinking, what is the one image people should remember? Because that is where a lot of the artwork starts to go wrong, especially dark artwork. It becomes very easy to throw everything at it. Blood, smoke, skulls, textures, symbols, creatures, different effects, distressed type, random background details, and individually, all those things can look cool, but cool is not the same as strong. A strong image needs hierarchy, it needs a center, it needs a reason for every element to be there. Otherwise the viewer, they're not experiencing the artwork, they're just scanning for noise. And I know that because I used to do it. Years ago, I would try to prove the value of a piece by adding more and more to it. If someone felt weak, I added texture. If the composition felt empty, I added another object. If the idea was not landing, I added more atmosphere. But the older I get and the more client work I do, the more I realise that strong artwork is often what you choose not to include. That is not as exciting to say add more detail, but it is usually more important. For Hard to Kill, the central idea had to be survival. Not pretty survival, not clean, heroic survival, something more damaged. Something that had been attacked, wrapped up, cut, restricted, but is still alive. That is why the hand became the focal point. A hand is human, it's vulnerable, it can reach, resist, fight, suffer, and hold on. And when you wrap snakes around it, the image immediately has tension. There's danger, there's movement, there's pressure. The snakes, they're not just decoration, they are the thing trying to contain the hand. They create the threat, they create the shape, they pull the eye around the image. And because the hand is vertical, reaching upward through all of that, the composition starts to become something very quickly. This hurt thing, but it's not finished. That's the kind of idea I'm looking for in artwork now. Something simple enough to understand quickly, but strong enough to sit with for longer. Because if someone has to study your image for 30 seconds before they understand the point, you might have already lost them. It doesn't mean that every image needs to be obvious or simple, but it does mean the emotional read should be clear. With this one, I wanted the viewer to feel pressure and aggression and resistance almost immediately. The hand gives you that human element, the snake gives you that threat, the red gives you the intensity, and the black gives the weight. The logo gives the identity. The circular type and sigil help frame the piece like an emblem. Everything is pushing towards the same feeling, and that is the difference between an image that has a lot of elements and an image that has a lot of intent. Those are not the same thing. One of the biggest challenges of this kind of artwork is making it dark without making it muddy, because dark artwork can collapse very quickly. If everything is black, red, textured, and distressed, the whole image can become a heavy mess. So the important question becomes, where does the eye go first? For me, it needed to be the hand. That is why the skin tone is so important. In a mostly black and red composition, the skin gives the viewer something human to land. It breaks the palette without ruining it. Then the snakes wrap around the focal point and pull the eye through the rest of the image. The red background adds aggression, but it has to stay behind the subject. The logo needs to feel powerful, but it can't overpower the hand. The circular text and symbols need to add atmosphere, but they cannot become the main event. That is the constant balancing act. Every element wants attention. Your job as the artist is to decide which element deserves it the most. And this is something I think a lot of artists struggle with, because when you have the skill to render things, you naturally want to render everything. You want every corner to look impressive. You want every texture to be interesting. You want people to zoom in and notice all the work. But the viewer does not experience the image the way that you experience making it. They do not see the hours, they don't know how many layers you've used, they don't know which part took the longest, they see the whole image first. And in the first second, the image either has impact or it doesn't. That is why detail has to serve and read. If details make the idea clearer, stronger, or more memorable, keep it. If the detail is only there to prove you worked hard, it might be weakening the piece completely. And that is a hard lesson to learn because as artists, we often attach value to effort. We think, I spent ages on this part, so it must be important. But the final image doesn't care how long something took. If it does not help the artwork, it does not matter how much time you spent on it. That is brutal, but it's useful. With this piece, I wanted it to feel intense but still graphic. That meant keeping the shapes readable. The hand needed a strong silhouette, the snakes needed to wrap around it clearly. The red background needed energy, but not so much that it became flattening. And the whole thing had to work as a square single cover, but also have enough graphic strength to live on merch. That's another reason clarity matters. Artwork for music, it's not just viewed full size on screen. It might become a tiny streaming thumbnail, it might appear on social media, it might sit on a t-shirt, it might be seen from across the room. So if the idea only works when people zoom in, it's probably not strong enough. That is something I think a lot more now more than what I used to. Early on, I cared more about whether the artwork looked impressive to other artists. Now I care much more about whether the artwork does the job. Does it communicate quickly? Does it fit the tone? Does it have a strong focal point? Does it make sense for the client? Does it hold up in different formats? Does it feel like something people would actually want to use, share, wear, or remember? Those questions matter, and they do not make the artwork less creative, they make it more intentional. I think this is the fear that if you think too much about purpose, the work becomes less artistic. But I have found the opposite. A clear purpose often makes the creative decisions much stronger. It gives you something to push against. With Hard to Kill, the purpose was not vague. It needed to feel heavy. It needed to feel aggressive. It needed to feel like survival through damage. It needed to belong in the music. So when I'm making decisions, I can keep coming back to that. Does this make it feel more aggressive? Does this make the survival idea clearer? Does this make the hand feel more trapped or more defiant? Does this add to the tone? Or is it just for decoration? And that kind of thinking keeps the piece focused, because without that, it's easy to drift. You start with one idea, then add another and another, and then suddenly the artwork is not about anything specific anymore. It's just a collection of things you thought looked good at the time. And that's the difference I wish I'd understood earlier. And good artwork is not just a part of good looking parts. It is a set of decisions moving in the same direction. That applies whether you're making cover art, posters, merch, book covers, personal work, and anything. Before asking what else can I add, ask what is the image actually about? If the answer is vague, adding more detail probably it's not going to fix that. It might make the piece look busier, it might make it look more finished, it might impress people for a second, but it won't necessarily make it stronger. The stronger idea usually gives you better decisions. It tells you what to emphasize, it tells you what to remove, it tells you where the contrast should be, it tells you what the viewer should feel. And for me, that is where the best artwork usually comes from. Not adding everything, from choosing the right things and pushing them hard. So when I look at this piece, the parts I care most about aren't necessarily the tiny details. It's the fact the image reads quickly. Hand, snakes, danger, survival. Basically, hard to kill. That is the chain. That if it works, the details have something to support. If that doesn't work, the details are just decoration. And that is the main lesson I would take from this piece. Your art does not always need more detail. Sometimes it needs a stronger idea. Sometimes it needs a clearer focal point, and sometimes it needs fewer elements fighting for attention. Sometimes it needs you to stop proving how much you can draw and start deciding what the image is actually supposed to do. That is something that I'm still learning. I do not think you'll ever fully master it. Every piece has its own problem. Every client has a different need. Every brief asks for a slightly different balance between clarity, style, detail, and emotion. But the more I do this, the more I come back to the same question. What is the one thing this image needs people to remember? This was my process for Free Warren's Hard to Kill. Let me know if you want more breakdowns like this, where I talk through the thinking behind the artwork rather than just showing the drawing process. And if you are an artist, I would generally like to know, do you struggle more with adding too much or knowing what to leave out? Let me know down below, and thank you.